Let's kick things off with arguably the favorite, or arguably the top two favorites for this year's Breeders' Cup Classic. Accelerate and West Coast, their final preps came in the Awesome Again out at Santa Anita a few weeks ago. Here is the stretch run of the Awesome Again.
Lieutenant Prime Attraction, 3/16 left to go. It's Accelerate with West Coast dogged on the inside. Isotherm between them running a bold race. West Coast and Accelerate, a riveting renewal of the Awesome Again. Accelerate on the outside with his head in front close to home. West Coast running out of puff has given a good account of himself, but Accelerate keeps powering on. Accelerate 2.5 lengths coming away to beat West.
Accelerate gets the job done. Visually, it was not the most impressive effort from he or West Coast. I suppose if you're going to give anyone the benefit of the doubt, probably Accelerate and West Coast are the two that you should do that with. West Coast, we know what he's capable of on his best day, and Accelerate, he's had just a bang-up campaign. He's gone out there and won basically everything there is to win. If he were to cap it with a victory in the Breeders' Cup Classic, I think you could make a legitimate case for him as Horse of the Year. That's another story for another day over Justify. As far as West Coast is concerned, he had every right to need a race, but how often do we see Bob Baffert bring horses back when they're not ready to go? This is sort of Baffert's move, where, you know what? Okay, even if you want to say he needed one to get a little bit tighter, I don't particularly believe that West Coast was an 80% horse that day. I feel like he was probably closer to what he's got. Now, does that mean that he's incapable of winning the Classic in a couple weeks? No, I don't believe that for a second. Who knows? Maybe I'll pick him, maybe I won't. I've got time, but he can certainly move forward, and I expect him to move forward. I just don't know how much. Accelerate, he deserves the benefit of the doubt. That was not visually the most impressive effort, but I'd be lying to you if I said I was thrilled with the idea of him a little bit reluctant to load into the gate, throwing a little bit of a fit in the gate, running wide throughout, and then still going on and getting the job done. It certainly, let's say, he needed to work to win, and I suppose as a prep, that's the goal. You want to get a little bit of work out of him, get him ready for what the ultimate game is, but at the same time, I don't know. Was it too much? Did he have to do too much to get the job done there? It is also worth noting the John Sadler barn is relatively cold right now, and as everyone is well aware of, Sadler's numbers in the Breeders' Cup are not particularly strong, and his numbers outside of Southern California are quite poor. So you're going to have to overcome all that with those horses. We move on to another prep. This was out, I believe, the same day, out on the East Coast at Belmont Park, the Jockey Club Gold Cup. You had a number of horses in there. Most notably, we're going to talk about 3 of them, and they happen to be the top 3 finishers: Discreet Lover, Thunder Snow, Mendelssohn, the stretch run of the Jockey Club.
Put to the whip. The main threats are coming. Mendelssohn and Thunder Snow and Discreet Image is trying too. On the far outside, they're into the final furlong. Thunder Snow has taken the lead. Discreet Image is coming. Mendelssohn is on the inside. Diversify is given way. Here comes the finish. It is going to be a photo finish, and I think it was Discreet Lover.
Discreet Lover, no disrespect. I feel like this was the perfect storm, where he had everything work in his favor. He had a hot pace up on the front end. Those horses came back to him. He was able to sit back, make that run, and get the job done. 1.25 miles he is capable at, which is more than you can possibly say for some of these other runners. But at the same time, have you ever sat there, and as much as I love this horse, has anyone ever sat there and looked at him and really thought, you know what, grade 1, Breeders' Cup Classic type? No. I think he can hit the board, or at least maybe run 4th, and spice up a superfecta at 30 or 40 to 1. I just have a very difficult time envisioning him winning the Classic, and if he does, again, no disrespect to the Uriah St. Louis or anyone involved. I like the horse. I think he's very, very nice, and I think it's a great story. If he wins, you can't help but look at this and say this is probably a relatively weak Breeders' Cup Classic. Right now, I don't think it is, but if you get some kind of, just very, very, wacky off the reservation kind of result, then yeah, I think you can start to question how good this field actually was. I thought Mendelssohn ran a tremendous race. Thought he cut out he was pushing Diversify with the fractions, and condolences to Rick Violet's family and everyone. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this week, or over the weekend, I should say. Discreet Lover. Diversify will not be going in the Classic, which takes out a little bit of a pace factor, which could help a horse like Mendelssohn, where on paper it doesn't look like there's a ton of early gas here, and you kind of know what his game is now. He's proven that he is a front runner. He wants to go to the front. That's where he does his best running. 1.25 miles, not a problem for him. I think if he can get away with slightly softer fractions in the Breeders' Cup Classic, he could be a little bit interesting going at what should be I would imagine 7-1, 8-1. I think overseas right now he's somewhere in that 10-1 range. I think he is going to take a little bit of money though. And Thunder Snow, I know a lot of people are a little bit disappointed with the effort from Thunder Snow, saying, well, he had a perfect setup, he's never going to get a better opportunity, yada yada yada. Keep in mind that was his second start off of the Dubai layoff. His first start was essentially a non-effort over in Europe in a grass race, showed speed and just stopped. Came over here, his first start on dirt since the World Cup, which he won. Thought he ran just fine. Now, yes, he did get a perfect setup, but at the same time, who's to say he doesn't work out another perfect setup in a race like the Classic? I think he can be closer to the pace, especially if it is a little bit more moderate. Instead of going 45 and change or 46, maybe they go 47 to the half, and now all of a sudden, instead of being 8 lengths off of it, maybe he's only 2 or 3 lengths off of it. I don't think Thunder Snow is totally without a chance in here, and I know a lot of people are poo-pooing his chances, and maybe he's not going to run well. I don't personally see any reason why he wouldn't run well, or at least run competitively. Not saying I'm going to pick him, not saying he's going to win, but I think he still at least makes a little bit of sense. Let's go on to the Travers. The Travers, again, 3-year-old restricted race, so you got to take that into consideration. We just spoke about Mendelssohn. He also ran in the Travers. He was up there cutting out the fractions in that race as well. Unfortunately for him, there was another horse in there that sat the perfect trip just off of him, and he really relished getting back to the main track, talking about Catholic Boy. Here's the stretch run of this year's Travers.
And it's Catholic Boy. Catholic Boy has taken the lead on the outside. Mendelssohn is full out toward the rail. It's 5 lengths back to Bravazzo, who's now third. Then Vino Rosso and King Zachary on the outside. They're coming down to the 16th pole. Catholic Boy is pulling away. He's so impressive today, the others didn't even have a prayer. Catholic Boy rolls in the run. Happy Travers.
So, Catholic Boy, the problem with him, or the concern anyway, he had a little bit of an illness. He missed a little bit of time, missed a couple workouts, but it seems like he is back in good form. Mike Welsh said that he looked very, very impressive working down at Churchill Downs most recently, but I think it's well within the let's say it's fair. If you as a handicapper look at it and go, horse hasn't run since the end of August, goes out for is good. I think Jonathan Thomas is a good trainer, but this is sort of an unprecedented level for him to be on. And I know he was a Pletcher assistant, but at the end of the day, now you're the one driving the ship. You're going to have one of the favorites for the Breeders' Cup Classic. We'll find out if this horse is ready to go for a race like that. 10 furlongs off of such a long layoff. It's one thing if Baffert does it. It's another thing if it's basically anyone else that does that. I'm going to be very curious to see how Catholic Boy performs. And he really feels like one to me where I would not be stunned if he took a big step forward and was a major, major player as far as the win is concerned. And to be honest with you, as much as I like Catholic Boy, I picked him in the Travers. I've liked him for quite some time. Wouldn't be surprised at all either if he ran poorly and finished up the board. Or up the track, rather, off the board. Bravazzo was also in that race, and it sounds like he's going to go on to this spot. He also ran the Pennsylvania Derby, which we'll talk about more momentarily. To be honest, I don't think he is a win threat, but I said it after the Travers. He ran poorly in Pennsylvania, but I'm going to say it again. If they do choose to run him in the Classic, and again, these fields can be a little bit topsy-turvy for the next little while. At 50 or 60 to 1, I would still probably consider using him underneath. Maybe not in second, but third and fourth for sure if I'm playing a try or a superfecta, just because, you know what? He's that kind of horse that more often than not, he shows up with an honest bid. Infrequently is it good enough to win, but more often than not, he shows up. The Pennsylvania Derby is going to sort of produce one of the favorites, and that is a horse called McKinsey, another Bob Baffert trainee in here. He was arguably the best 3-year-old before getting hurt early on the Triple Crown Trail. We hadn't seen him since March. He trains up to a race like the Pennsylvania Derby and produces an effort like this one.
Together at the top of the stretch, they come off the turn, and McKinsey has the lead. It's McKinsey, but here comes Axelrod. He'll try to make a race of it on the outside. Furlong to go. McKinsey is in front. Axelrod set down by Joe Bravo. Mike Smith working on McKinsey. McKinsey holding on. Axelrod is full out. McKinsey is clear as they come down to the finish. Baffert, Smith, McKinsey, they've done it. McKinsey has it by 2.
We're getting hurt early on the Triple Crown Trail. We hadn't seen him since March. He trains up to a race like the Pennsylvania Derby and produces an effort like this one. Now, again, this is kind of where I go back and forth. And I look at it and say, pardon me as I get ready to take a quick little swig of water so I don't start coughing in your ear. I look at that and say, okay, going back to West Coast anyway, the idea that, well, okay, West Coast needed a race, da-da-da-da-da. Well, in theory, wouldn't McKenzie have needed a race too? And instead, all McKenzie did was go out there and absolutely blitz the field. Now, I understand Axelrod ran very well, and we'll talk about him in a second, but I kind of look at it and say, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too, or you can't use it as an excuse in one instance and then perhaps, use it the other way around. Do you follow me? You can't look at it and say, well, West Coast needed a race, when McKenzie, in theory, would have needed a race, and McKenzie went out there and blew the doors off of a field, and West Coast went out there and he got a little bit tired at the end. Now, maybe he was doing it against better horses and older horses, so you've got some other pieces there, but I don't like it when people use an argument for one and not for the other, especially when they are as closely sort of, not related, but they're basically coming from the same camp. I think McKenzie is a very talented horse. I'm not totally convinced about 10 furlongs with him. I thought it was peculiar after that race that Baffert said the Classic or the Clark handicap, and to me immediately it was an instance of, well, the Classic's at 10 furlongs, the Clark is at 9. Perhaps there's some questions in that camp about how far this horse wants to go as well. He's going to take money from a talent standpoint. I have no real question about how good he is. I think he's very, very talented. Not totally convinced about that final eighth of a mile. I would possibly use him defensively. I can't imagine myself picking him, but I still have some time before I have to worry about that. Axelrod, I think, is a talented horse. I think he's very nice. He's the kind of horse, to me, win, lose, or draw in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic this year, I'm going to be very, very anxious to see what we get from him next year as a 4-year-old, because I do think he's continuing to improve, and I do think there is some legitimate ability in there. Another big race from Saratoga we're going to take a look at. This was the final Grade 1 for older horses on the dirt. This was the Woodward. Now, the Woodward was a giant field, mainly because there was no superstars in there, and ultimately a first-time dirt horse was the one that prevailed. Here's the stretch run.
For home, 1-2, with a host of pursuers looking to come and get them. Third is Sunny Ridge. Kurilov is next, and Yoshida is closing with a rush on the far outside. And here comes Yoshida, storming home in the center with Gunnevera. These two have kicked it in, and Yoshida has taken the lead under Joel Rosario. Leofric is second on the inside. Yoshida has won the Woodward. It was very close for a second.
Yoshida is another one that sounds like he is working guns blazing leading into the Classic. And look, he's in great hands with Bilmont. But I kind of, I guess this is one of those things where you can make a decision and you're going to have to make a decision. Yoshida is going to be a very, very nice price. Yoshida is not exposed on dirt. His only dirt start was a victory, albeit against a weaker field than what he's going to face in the Classic. 10 furlongs, I don't think is a problem for him, but there's no guarantees. He's usually done his best running in sort of that 9 furlongs, 8 to 9 furlong range. I think he is very, very talented, and initially I looked at it, and I still feel this way a little bit. I'm not totally sold on that race, the Woodward as a whole, but Gunnevera is going to come back. He'll run in the Classic. It was announced earlier today. Arad Ortiz Jr. has the mount for that horse, and I think Gunnevera is very talented. He's run decently enough at Churchill Downs. He's always going to be sort of a horse that has to overcome the pace situation, and if there is a lack of pace in the Classic, then that could compromise his chances. Yoshida, at least, has a little bit of a versatile gear where he can be a little bit closer to the pace. I do all this. As we get closer and closer, I'm becoming slightly more intrigued with a horse like Yoshida. I don't know if I'm going as far as to say I want to pick him, or heck, even bet him, but if he's 20-1, and I'm not totally sold on some of these other horses, then perhaps Yoshida is an interesting alternative in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic. One other horse card we're going to take a look at, and we don't have tape for obvious reasons for those of you that know stories and situations. We don't have any tape from the Lucas Classic, but the winner there, Mind Your Biscuits, sounds like he'll be cross-centered in both the Classic as well as the Dirt Mile. I look at this horse, and I was never sold that additional distance would be his friend. He ran a very, very good second in the Whitney behind Diversify earlier this year at Saratoga. You could make some arguments there. Diversify was out there by his lonesome on the front end, but guess what? I mean, he was setting legitimate fractions. But the wet track certainly didn't help a horse like Mind Your Biscuits. Or I don't want to say it didn't help him, but it was just something else that you got to factor in. It was just an odd situation where perhaps it didn't help him, or perhaps it didn't hurt him. I don't know. That remains to be seen. We don't really know. He came back in that Lucas Classic, though, and I thought he was fantastic. Thought he was an absolute superstar in that race. And again, I know it was inferior company, and I know there was a number of other things that you can point at. And look, Toast in New York, who's also possible runner in the Breeders' Cup Classic. That was his second start or his third start in about 4 years. So, all things in perspective. But at the end of the day, the way that Mind Your Biscuits ran that day, at 9 furlongs, at Churchill Downs, at night, all things that he's going to be dealing with in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Andy galloped out very well. Andy has some versatility. He's the one, if I was saying right now, who am I getting really, really drawn toward? Be a horse like Mind Your Biscuits. Am I going to pick him? I don't know yet. I've got time, as do you. But Mind Your Biscuits becomes more and more intriguing to me. The extra horses that I will briefly mention, and who knows if they're all going to go here. I believe it is confirmed that Roaring Lion is coming for the Breeders' Cup Classic on the heels of that very impressive effort over at Ascot on Champions Day. He's by Kitten's Joy. I can't think of a Kitten's Joy that has ever run well on dirt. If you can, fire away at me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt or beneath the video player on YouTube, because I just, off the top of my head, I tried to sit there for a minute. Even Friday when I was down in New York, I couldn't think of one. Collected. Look, he was terrible in that race at Pennsylvania most recently, and that was his first start in quite some time. If you think he can rebound to his best, maybe, but I have a hard time taking him. Seeking the Soul, look, he's upset, and he's won Grade 1s at Churchill in the past, and I don't think he's like outclassed. I think he's a very, very talented horse. Maybe he's one you could use underneath War Story if he goes here. I just don't think he's this good, but he has popped at a big number in the past. I believe he ran 4th in the Classic last year at some giant price. Pavel. Now, Pavel is a horse that I've always thought highly of, but as more and more time has gone by here, as he's gotten older, I don't think he is quite of the upper echelon as far as Grade 1 runners are concerned. I think he won the weakest Grade 1 of the year for older horses, and that's including the Woodward. I think him winning that Stephen Foster at Churchill Downs, I don't think that was a good field at all. So, but the fact that he's run well at Churchill in the past, that's positive. And look, a 1.25 miles shouldn't be an issue for him. And Lone Sailor, I don't have too much to add. I think he's a nice horse. I don't think he's a true Grade 1 type. I don't think 10 furlongs is what he wants. I'd much rather see a horse like Lone Sailor in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile.